9 hours. That is how long the aircraft sat on the ground after the warning. At 3:30 in the morning, on December 8, 1941, General Douglas MacArthur learned that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. At 12:35 that afternoon, Japanese bombardment fell on Clark Field in the Philippines. Between those two moments, 9 hours passed, and the American planes never moved. This is the story of an order that was never given and a failure that was never punished. Watch, and you will learn how the largest heavy bomber force outside the United States was destroyed while it stood still. You had 9 hours, the same warning, the same enemy. What would you have done with them? In Hawaii, heads rolled within days. Admiral Kimmel and General Walter Short lost their commands almost immediately. The Roberts Commission named them derelict in their duty. Their careers ended in disgrace they carried to the grave. Now look at the Philippines. Same morning, same enemy, same catastrophe on the ground. MacArthur was awarded the Medal of Honor in 1942. No commission investigated him. No board of inquiry sat. No formal record of the decisions from that morning was ever produced. Two commanders failed against the same foe on the same day. One was destroyed by the process. One was decorated. Why? That is the question history still refuses to answer cleanly, and the answer, when you find it, will not comfort you. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what stood on that runway. 35 B-17 flying fortresses. Dozens of P-40 fighters. This was the Far East Air Force, largest concentration of American heavy bombers anywhere outside the mainland. Walk the flight line at Clark that autumn, and you smell it. Engine oil, hot metal, aviation fuel baking in tropical heat. Mechanics ran up the engines and the ground trembled. Washington saw these bombers as a deterrent, a fist held over the Pacific. From Clark, B-17 could reach Formosa, the island where Japanese aircraft were based. Intact, this force could strike first. Intact, it could hurt them. That was the entire point of parking it there. Remember that. It matters in 9 hours. Here is what makes the Philippines different from Pearl Harbor. There was no surprise. At Pearl Harbor, men slept until the bombs woke them. At Clark, the news arrived at 3:30 in the morning, clean and unambiguous. War had begun. Pilots were shaken awake in the dark. Radios crackled with confirmation from Hawaii. The whole command knew, hour after hour, the fighting had already started somewhere else and would come for them. Instead, there was no confidue, 100 itigu, to ibiquid, to die behind. No fog of ignorance. Every officer on Luzon understood the same fact. The enemy was already at war with them. Only one question remained open that morning, and it hung over everything. Strike first or wait? That question would not resolve itself, and General Louis Brereton commanded that air force, and he did not wait quietly. Early that morning, he went to MacArthur's headquarters in Manila and asked for permission to strike his target, the Japanese airfields on Formosa. Hit them before they hit us. The answer he received was not yes and not no. It was wait, he asked again. Wait. He pressed a third time, and wait. Chief of Staff Major General Richard Sutherland stood between Brereton and MacArthur, and the answer never changed. Brereton's own war diary recorded each request and each refusal, entry by entry, with times attached. He was not imagining it. He wrote it down as it happened. The clock kept moving, the bombers kept sitting, and the door began to close. Every minute of delay had a cost, and it ran both ways. While the Americans waited, The enemy drew closer to lawn. But that same morning, something rare happened over Formosa. Thick fog rolled across the Japanese airfields. Their aircraft could not take off. The strike that everyone feared was grounded by weather. For a few hours, the Americans held a gift they did not know how to use. An open window, an enemy blinded and stuck on his own runways. This was the moment to hit first. This was the golden hour, and it was closing, second by second, while 35 bombers idled at Clark. You are standing in that headquarters. Would you give the order, or would you wait one more time and cross the water and look at the enemy that morning? The Japanese pilots were not confident. They were afraid. They sat strapped into their cockpits, engines cold and eyes. Fog so dense they could not see the tips of their own wings, and they were certain of one thing the Americans knew. Pearl Harbor had happened hours ago, and surely the bombers at Clark were already airborne, already high-coming for them. Historian John Toland recorded their state of mind, expected to be caught on distracted, on lifted. The instant the fog lifted, they braced for a counterstrike that would gut them before they ever left for Formosa. Under our fog, every hour the fog, they waited for death to arrive from the south. The counterstrike they dreaded never came. And what happened at Clark instead was a tangle of orders that cancelled each other out. Fearing the bombers would be caught on the ground, someone ordered them into the air to circle, empty and waiting. So they flew. They found no enemy. Eventually, the strike on Formosa was finally approved. The B-17s came down to refuel and load bombs for the attack that had been delayed all morning. They landed at Clark and parked, wingtip to wingtip, close together to speed the servicing. Fuel trucks moved among them. The crews walked off to lunch. It was past noon. Then at 12:35, the radar station reported incoming aircraft. Message was passed. But by then, the planes were on the ground, fueled, and it was already too late. The siren rose first, a thin wail over the noon heat. Then, the sound the crews would never forget, the deep drone of Japanese aircraft coming in from the north, high and unhurried. Bombs fell in neat lines down the length of the runway. The B-17s exploded where they stood, tanks full, fuel igniting into towers of black smoke that climbed into the midday sky. Men sprinted from the mess hall, some still holding their lunch, running toward machines that were already burning. Zeros followed, strafing the wreckage, and the Japanese pilots overhead were stunned by what they saw below them. The American aircraft were lined up in perfect rows, neat and still, as though no warning had ever reached them. As though the last 9 hours had never happened. At Kotsikada, count the of the 35 B-17 were destroyed at Clark that afternoon. Dozens of P-40s burned on the ground before they could climb. In a matter of hours, striking power of American air forces in the Philippines was it effectively wiped out. The fist held over the Pacific became a field of blackened, twisted metal. There was no great air battle. No clash of fighters over Luzon. The most powerful bomber force outside the United States did not fall in combat. It died, standing still, parked in rows, waiting for an order that never came. 9 hours of warning, and it ended like this. The men who serviced those planes at dawn watched them burn before the lunch dishes were cleared. After the war, the accounts refused to line up. Brereton insisted he had requested permission to strike again and again, and he had his war diary to prove the times. MacArthur. claimed he never received any such request, that no one ever asked him for an attack on Formosa. Sutherland, the chief of staff who stood between them, told his own version. 3 men, 3 stories, none of them fit together. Historian D. Clayton James, MacArthur's most careful biographer, laid the contradictions side by side and could not reconcile them. Somewhere in those 9 hours our decision was made, or refused, or simply never faced. And the men and where who were spent the rest of their lives disagreeing about what actually happened. In 9 hours does the truth sit. MacArthur never gave one clear explanation for those 9 hours. Not once. Over the years, his account shifted. Sometimes he blamed the weather, and sometimes Rizia said no request had ever reached him. Sometimes he denied the whole framing of the question and grew cold. No minutes of any meeting survive. No paper trail records who said what to whom in that headquarters in Manila. The one man who knew for certain what he had decided or failed to decide carried it in silence to his death in 1964. He wrote a long memoir, and he addressed almost everything in his career. Weg. From Lacoado on in hours at Clark Theathard, he gave shifting fragments and no accounting. A commander is responsible for what happens on his watch. This is what accountability looks like when it is refused. Otozen set the 2 commanders side by side one last time. Kimmel and Short were investigated in public, branded derelict, stripped of rank, and spent decades fighting to clear names that were never fully cleared. MacArthur, facing a comparable disaster, was recommended by Chief of Staff George Marshall for the Medal of Honor, in part to counter Japanese propaganda, in part because Washington could not afford to disgrace its most famous general in the war's first weeks. Same morning, same enemy, same planes lost on the ground. Opposite fates, and justice is not blind here. It opens its eyes, and it reads the rank, and it weighs the reputation, and then it decides how hard to look. The higher the man, the softer the questions. You have seen this, so have I. Lost bombers were only the beginning of the bill. Without air power, the Philippines could not be defended. The Japanese controlled the sky, then the sea, then the ground. Within months came the fall of Bataan, then the Bataan Death March. Tens of thousands of American and Filipino prisoners driven along a road under a brutal sun, beaten, starved, and shot when they fell. Many never reached the end of it trace, the line backward, and it runs to the burning aircraft on the Clark runway, to the strike that was delayed all morning, to the order that was never clearly given, a decision that was never made, and the price of it was paid in blood by men who never sat in that headquarters and never got a vote. Record keeps this. 9 hours between the warning at 3:30 a.m. and the bombs at 12:35 p.m. on December 8, 1941. The record keeps this. 17 of 35 B-17s destroyed on the ground at Clark Field. The record keeps this. 1 Medal of Honor awarded in 1942 and no commission of inquiry ever convened. The record even keeps this from another war. 297 French sailors killed at Mers el Kabir in roughly 15 minutes when the British opened fire in July 1940. Records are good at numbers. What the record does not keep, which order was refused, and by whom in that Manila headquarters. What no record keeps, and what a mechanic thought as he watched the plane he serviced at dawn burn before lunch. Numbers survive. The decision that made them did not. 9 hours. The same warning, the same enemy, the same clock you were handed at the start. One man had the authority to give the order, and the order never arrived. Planes that could have struck were destroyed, standing still, Spegafsul, Stauixul, and the man responsible was decorated instead of devastated. That is where the ledger closes and the question opens. Nachu, if you had stood in headquarters in Manila with the fog still holding over Formosa and given the order still open, would you have given the order strike? Or would you have waited with bar time, telling yourself there was time? Think before you answer. And if your own family carries a story of a decision like this, an order given or refused in a war that shaped them, then tell it. Some records only survive because someone spoke.